People don't stop correcting others because they agree. They stop because correction has started to cost more than it gives back. Do not rebuke mockers or they will hate you. Proverbs 9:8 describes an emotional tax most people eventually refuse to pay. Correction used to signal care, shared standards, and group stability. Now it often signals risk, isolation, or becoming a target. So people adapt by staying silent, watching errors grow unchecked. This silence feels like maturity, but functions like retreat. The Bible identified this shift as mockery dominance, where truth no longer corrects behavior. Instead, behavior trains silence. At that point, engagement collapses without noise, and no one announces it. In public institutions, correction has become a calculated risk rather than a shared responsibility. You can see it when senior figures pause before speaking, then choose agreement shaped like silence. The room already knows what is wrong, yet no one names it out loud. This restraint is not strategic patience, it is reputational fear. Influence now carries an emotional perimeter that others learn not to cross. Those inside the system understand the cost of visible disagreement. Loss of access, public retaliation, and sudden isolation are no longer theoretical outcomes. So correction retreats quietly into private conversations that never reach daylight. Proverbs 9:8 observed this stage when it noted, "Do not rebuke mockers or they will hate you." That sentence assumes a setting where power reacts emotionally to challenge. In such environments, truth does not disappear, it becomes unsafe to carry publicly. Officials learn to measure survival before accuracy. Each silence teaches the next person what happens when resistance becomes visible. Over time, the absence of correction starts to look like unity. The public interprets calm as consensus, unaware it is enforced by fear. What remains is a performance of agreement that conceals internal collapse. This is how authority stops being corrected without ever declaring itself untouchable. It simply waits and watches who still speaks. This pattern did not begin in modern institutions or televised chambers. Groups have always learned when correction becomes socially expensive. Ancient councils, courts, and ruling circles reached the same quiet arrangement. The powerful learned who would challenge them and removed those voices first. The rest learned faster by watching. Silence spread without instruction, enforced by memory. Proverbs 9:8 captured this stage as a recurring social condition, not a personal flaw. When mockery holds leverage, correction signals danger. History shows this shift always precedes visible decay. Records describe leaders surrounded by agreement, while mistakes multiplied unchecked. Dissent did not vanish, it relocated inward. People spoke carefully, then indirectly, then not at all. Over time, the group mistook obedience for stability. Outsiders mistook order for strength. Internally, everyone sensed the fragility, but named it nowhere. This is how collapse advances without resistance. The Bible recorded this repetition without urgency or drama. It simply noted what happens when rebuke reliably produces hatred. Once that threshold is crossed, silence becomes the dominant language. From that point forward, authority no longer needs to threaten. The group has already learned the lesson. The Bible does not introduce this behavior as a crisis, it records it as a condition already in motion. Proverbs 9:8 states, "Do not rebuke mockers or they will hate you," assuming correction has become personally costly. This observation appears again when Amos noted, "The prudent keep quiet in such times, for the times are evil." That silence is not virtue, it is a signal. Jesus echoed the same withdrawal pattern when he warned against casting pearls where they invite attack instead of consideration. These are not spiritual commands, they are behavioral snapshots. Each verse documents a moment when speech stops serving correction and starts triggering punishment. Scripture treats this as a late-stage marker, not an early warning. By the time silence dominates, mockery already controls the emotional environment. Authority no longer needs to silence critics directly.
It only needs to react harshly once. The rest of the group adjusts automatically. The Bible does not dramatize this shift or assign heroes. It simply records that when rebuke produces hatred reliably, wisdom learns to hide. What is left unsaid becomes more important than what is spoken, and the record continues without commentary. When correction disappears, the psychological load does not vanish with it. It relocates inward and begins to distort perception. Individuals start second-guessing obvious errors before voicing them. Over time, they stop forming the sentences at all. This creates a split between what is seen and what is expressed. Proverbs 9:8 already assumed this cost when it linked rebuke with personal hostility. The mind learns through repetition that accuracy brings punishment. Silence then feels safer than clarity. This internal filtering produces fatigue, not peace. People begin monitoring reactions instead of reality. Attention shifts from facts to faces. Emotional weather becomes more important than observable outcomes. In these environments, confidence is mistaken for correctness. The loudest response sets the boundary of truth. Those inside adapt by shrinking their field of concern. They stop correcting not only leaders, but peers, then themselves. Errors compound quietly because nothing interrupts them early. What looks like restraint is actually psychological narrowing. The group loses its ability to self-correct without noticing when it happened. At that stage, silence is no longer a choice. It is a conditioned response that activates before thought finishes forming. As silence spreads, power begins testing how far it can move without resistance. Each unchallenged statement resets the boundary of what can be said next. Those watching notice the pattern before they admit it. Correction no longer fails loudly, it fails quietly through absence. Proverbs 9:8 returns here as a diagnostic, not a warning, because hate no longer needs to be expressed openly. Disapproval is assumed. The cost is already understood. Institutions start drifting from accountability into performance. Meetings become rituals where outcomes are decided before discussion begins. Language shifts toward praise, deflection, or strategic ambiguity. Anyone who still corrects appears unstable, disloyal, or reckless. This reframing protects authority without issuing commands. The group begins enforcing silence on itself. Even private doubts feel dangerous when shared with the wrong person. What once required intimidation now requires only precedent. Each quiet retreat makes the next one easier. The structure still stands, but its feedback system has collapsed. At that point, escalation no longer comes from conflict. It comes from unchecked momentum moving in one direction, with no visible resistance to slow it. At this point, the warning no longer needs volume. It is already understood by everyone inside the structure. Proverbs 9:8 functions here as a confirmation that the environment has shifted permanently. Something has inverted. Correction is no longer seen as care. It is treated as threat. Silence is no longer passive, it is interpreted as alignment. The group begins confusing absence of resistance with legitimacy. This is where accountability dissolves without confrontation. No one announces loyalty, yet loyalty governs behavior. Those with authority sense it and stop checking themselves. Those without authority sense it and stop checking others. Amos described this stage when he observed that the prudent fall quiet during evil times, not because evil is loud, but because it punishes accuracy. The system now resists feedback instinctively. It rejects information before evaluating it. What remains is a self-sealing environment that cannot hear correction even when collapse becomes visible. From the outside, everything looks intact. From the inside, everyone is adjusting posture. The Bible recorded this stage without emotion. It simply noted that when rebuke reliably produces hatred, wisdom retreats, and something else takes its place. Eventually, the system reaches a point where correction feels not just dangerous, but unnecessary. Silence has trained everyone what is permitted. No rule enforces it anymore. People self-censor before ideas fully form. Proverbs 9:8 no longer sounds like a warning, it sounds like a description of daily life. Mockery does not need to shout, it simply waits. Those with authority speak freely, assuming absence of challenge means acceptance. Those without authority watch carefully, mistaking survival for wisdom. The public sees calm and calls it stability. Inside, errors continue uncorrected because no one remembers how to interrupt them safely. This is how engagement collapses without drama. No moment marks the failure, no speech names the shift. Correction did not lose an argument, it became too expensive to attempt. And once silence becomes normal, the next stage arrives quietly, without resistance, without announcement, and without anyone certain who allowed it to happen.